Hi, I'm Dr. Dan Ratner. Today I'm going to talk to you about how to change your self-esteem for the better. If you haven't already, click subscribe, hit like, and ring the bell for notifications, and put your comments below. One of the reasons I wanted to talk to you all about self-esteem is that it is an incredibly important part of getting better from symptoms, and it relates to the power column, which I've talked about in an earlier video this week. One of the things that you have to do to feel powerful is to have a good relationship with yourself. That's actually the central thing you have to do to feel powerful. How do you do that? Well, that's what self-esteem is. It's a good relationship with yourself. I'm going to talk today about how you do that. People spend years and years and years in therapy trying to change their self-esteem, but they don't tend to have much luck with it. What they usually find out is, I'm me, and there's certain things that I can't change. But that's actually not true, because there are things you can do to understand yourself better, and the symptoms will allow you to understand yourself better than any therapy ever would. And that's what happened for me. So let's talk about what the body can provide in these ideas. First of all, I've said this before, I will say it many times again. The body is the most empathic entity we have. It is the thing that remembers your core self, who you really are. We can say we don't know for sure, but the body actually does. At some level, unconsciously, you know who you are. And it's our job to get you in touch with what that narrative is. So, one of the things I talk about with self-esteem is nailing down your core narrative. We have a central story that we tell ourselves, but the fact is it is rarely, if ever, accurate. A lot of times it has self-criticism in it. It has false ideas about ourselves. It doesn't often recognize the key themes that we have. It doesn't even bring in our full trauma in a fully accepting way. These are the things we have to do to have good self-esteem. You cannot have good self-esteem if you've got a trauma sitting there that you're denying. Because what ends up happening is you're at war with yourself. To be at peace with yourself, you have to come to terms with what your real story is. So how do we do that? The first thing you have to do is recognize the false or negative views that you have. And these aren't your actual core narrative. That's what you've been telling yourself all these years. When I talk about a core narrative, I'm talking about who are you really? That is something that is totally real, completely accurate. I'm getting a mind-body experience right now. Tickle in the throat. I must be having some feeling about my own core narrative. See? And I've just made it go away. Right in the moment. Oh, now it's coming back. It's playing with us. We'll see how it goes. But here's the thing. You need to think about who you are at your core. What that means is very central themes that broadly describe your experience. In my experience, it was really about validity. And a lot of it related to father figures, but not only that. It was just validity in general across the board. I thought of myself as valid because I actually really liked myself and I was doing really well. But at some level, my body was telling me, you don't feel as good about yourself as you could. This is how we actually address self-esteem in a mind-body sort of way that can get people relief and greater change in self-esteem faster, because we're getting different information than we get when we're in a therapy room talking about what we think about ourselves or what somebody else thinks about ourselves. The body's telling us what we need to know. Once you recognize your false or negative narratives, then we need to replace it with something that's real and optimistic. Now, I want to say this. I was actually always very optimistic about myself in many, many ways. And it's not that I wasn't being real, but I wasn't letting in the fullness of my trauma. This is true for many, many people. One of the things that often happens for trauma survivors is that they want to downplay the trauma. Because one of the things about a trauma survivor is they pride themselves on being strong and not having been affected so much. If you want to address your self-esteem and make it better, you have to grant yourself permission to have suffered. That's the way to have better self-esteem. It comes from self-empathy. And believe it or not, even though we should be on our own sides, so often we're not. So often we are not empathizing with what actually happened to us. But you know what is empathizing with us is our body. So take your body at its word. It's telling you some important things. Now, I want to talk to you about how, as a pain sufferer, you can feel good about yourself. So there's many ways to feel good about the self for non-pain sufferers too. For that, you want to think about your core narrative and what hurt emotionally, and be empathic to yourself. Truly empathic, not just saying the words. Just saying things doesn't help. You have to actually believe it. But for pain sufferers, there are a couple of ways that I have of describing who you are that could help you feel really good about who you are and help you break through the symptoms as such. So one thing is the term Goodist. Goodist is a term that Sarno coined. I believe it was in his Divided Mind, his last book, which is my favorite of his books. The term Goodis is a very important term. What it describes is people who are always trying to do good, but on top of it, it describes people who are pretty self-critical, always striving to do better, partly because they feel they have to prove something. And, people who put a lot of pressure on themselves in every given moment to be good. These can be wonderful people, and I feel like I'm, patting myself on the back because I'm one of them. But these are my favorite kind of people. There is a downside to it, of course, because we tend to have a lot of symptoms. So that's the thing. If you are really good to other people, you will tend to have more symptoms. Now, that does not mean it has to stay that way. The secret here in feeling good about yourself from a self-esteem standpoint and symptoms is to be able to still be that good person you want to be without the symptoms. So I'll get into that in a second. One of the ways, though, that you need to do it is to start to develop some self-esteem for yourself as a pain sufferer. So one of the things that you could feel proud about in being a pain sufferer is that actually this is a psychological defense that is the most sophisticated and causes the least trouble for other people. So let's talk about defenses. Defenses are they're a process of the mind whereby we get something to stay in our unconscious mind. We don't want to know about it, and there's all kinds of different ways to do that. Well, one of the defenses that I particularly hate, it's my least favorite, is something called projection. In projection, the person doesn't want to know they're doing something, and even worse, they convince themselves that you are doing that, and then they tell you, and then you get mad at them, and then they say, oh, you're doing the bad thing. So it's a very nasty defense, and it's a very primitive defense. It's something that people who are not as developed tend to bring to the table. Now, I'm not saying that to criticize people like that. I'm just talking about development. Those people, a lot of times, if I work with them, they can get better and then get to the point where they can then develop the mind-body defense. So if you have symptoms, it's usually a sign that you are pretty sophisticated. You're handling your emotions in ways that are designed to not hurt anyone else. It's really the last stop on the train of psychological defenses. So it's something to feel proud of. So far we have, you're a very good person, you're always trying to do better, and you have the most mature defense you can have. These are things to feel good about. Now, of course, if you still have the symptoms, that's not a bargain you'd probably accept. But because I can help you get rid of the symptoms, these are just things that can help you feel good about yourself and build the self-esteem around the core narrative of what you've suffered. But the fact is, pain sufferers in general are people who protect other people from bad feelings. It's like you are falling on the grenade all the time. You may have been a receptacle for the psychological junk of other people. Think about those people who project versus the people who have a mind-body defense. We fit together well. People who project want to give away their feelings, and we have a tendency to be welcoming of that because we want to help. So your empathy is part of what leads to your symptoms. This is why developing self-esteem is so important, though, because if you have the right self-esteem, you'll be able to decide to be powerful in a way that still allows you to be good, but doesn't force you to accept the psychological baggage that other people may try to hand to you. Now, along with that is people are often threatened by people who have suffered. I know it sounds weird because you'd think they would just feel bad for us. But instead, they often recognize that we have a wisdom and an experience that they don't. And as a result, they may try to tear you down in certain ways. So things are kind of backwards from how they seem. When it comes to symptoms, one way to build self-esteem is to recognize you are the strong one. You are the one who survived the trauma and didn't turn it on anyone else. You're still a good person. So the reason this is so important is if you have this self-esteem, it builds power. And if you build power, that allows you to trust yourself more. And if you trust yourself more, doubt can come down. So all of those things that I talk about that are different than how other mind-body practitioners talk about things in relation to emotion, self-esteem and power are very key for getting better. One way we need to think about trauma is that it's actually a strength. I tended to think of my trauma both as not a trauma, I just didn't want to accept that it was, and that it actually made me worse than other people. That other people had fathers, or other people had this or that. And I felt that I wasn't judging them for it, I was judging me for it. And we need to help ourselves recognize the ways that we judge ourselves, the ways that we don't have a good relationship with ourselves. So as we're going along, if you have questions or comments, please put them below. These are complicated issues, and they're important, and they don't get talked about much. They get talked about in therapy, but in a very long-winded, long way that you can't often make changes. This is about making very specific changes. So how do we do it? Again, you need to recognize how your core narrative has not been discovered. If you're having bodily symptoms, then you don't understand yourself well enough. And I don't mean that as an insult. Same thing happened for me, and I had spent years in therapy, so I thought I knew myself well. Well, as it turns out, I did not have my core narrative set because I hadn't accepted my trauma. I hadn't accepted what was really hard for me. And you know why? It was because I wasn't able to be empathic with myself. Well, now I can do that. And it's because I've decided, you know what? This hurts so bad, I'm not willing to not see it. I have to go ahead and see what really hurts. And I let myself experience the world through that lens. And I started to see things about myself that I did not before. This is how you build real self-esteem. Ultimately, this is about coming to peace with yourself. So a lot of times, you might need a kind of pithy handle or solution to an aspect of self-esteem that's hurting. I'm going to give an example based on a guy I'm working with. He's a fantastic guy, but he was feeling guilty about his mom because his mom was this incredibly giving person, and he felt that he and his brothers did not appreciate her. And I said to him, okay, now how would we turn that negative into a positive self-esteem thing? Well, obviously he's not going to feel good about that, even though I'm not sure that he's right about that. He feels guilty about it. But what I said to him is I said, do you realize that you are living your life like your mom? You're honoring who she was. And as a result, what we did is we took this false narrative that he had of himself and made it the real thing. It felt true to him, and he knew it. And as a result, he could put that feeling aside, I think. We'll have to see how it plays out, but I think that really helped him to be able to say, oh, I am not this bad person I thought I was. I am a person who is living my life in a way that responds to my central narrative. And now I have a way to handle it. Same thing for me with father figures. I eventually realized that although I do have a father who adopted me, and he has been a great person in my life and a true father figure in lots of ways, there are ways in which he could never fill that void, no matter how hard he would have tried. And I had to accept that that was just a part of my own trauma. It wasn't his fault. It wasn't my fault. It just was. And so when we accept trauma, that is self-love. If you're having trouble adjusting self-esteem, it means you're not accepting a part of your story. And so think about that. All those years in therapy where people are not getting their self-esteem up, it's because they haven't accepted what really happened to them. So we need to look at that more. Now, I want to say one other thing in relation to symptoms and how it's different from the vast majority of psychology. As a therapist, when I'm working with somebody just more generally, I'm working towards people seeing all the shades of gray and all the nuances and integrating things. But interestingly, when I'm working with symptoms, I need to go in the opposite direction because symptoms come from a primitive place in relation to childhood. So we need to actually get very specific and kind of black and white in the thinking of how to understand it. That doesn't mean we take the black and white thinking and then enact it in real life, but we have to understand how there's very specific things that pop up that we need to address in their unique, specific forms, not in the integrated shades of gray way that happens in psychology. It's one of the reasons why long-term therapy can get bogged down, is it's not targeted enough, and symptom work allows us to target it more. So what you need to do is to start thinking about the ways to live your life that allow you to live a better life with you, to respect yourself more. And you can't fake that. It has to be something where you understand yourself at your core. When you do understand yourself at your core, though, you can start to watch out for the aggression of others, the projectors of the world who will try to dump their feelings into you. And that includes unconscious aggression because most of it's unconscious. I'm not saying people are bad, but they're walking around with a lot of unconscious stuff. You have to watch out for yourself in relation to your core narrative. One of my favorite phrases that I've developed is the idea of being fiercely in your own corner. Now, what does that mean? Once you have accepted your trauma, once you know your central narrative, which isn't always easy to do, but it's doable and just takes some discussion, then your job is to not doubt that narrative at all. To know that you've carried that with you your whole life and your body's validating it. And once you're in sync that way, it actually reduces the symptoms because the symptoms are no longer needed as much. Those symptoms were partly there to tell you about this central narrative, to tell you that you weren't accepting your trauma, to tell you that you're not holding yourself in high esteem when you really deserve it. So what do we do about that? There's a couple things I wanted to say, just a couple of tips. We'll get into more details in other videos and certainly in the comments if you guys have comments below. But there's a couple things that you can do to be fiercely in your own corner. One is setting boundaries. Now, I want to be clear about this. A lot of times people misuse setting boundaries. They do it in ways that hurt other people. You don't need to set boundaries in ways that hurt other people because when you're clear on a boundary, you can be very calm about it. You'll be at peace. A lot of people set boundaries in ways that are trying to force the issue to just make it better. That's going to hurt other people and it doesn't even help you. You have to hold yourself in the right mindset about self-esteem and feel good about who you are and what you need to set a boundary effectively. But setting boundaries is important. I also would say don't be afraid to clean house when people are not redeeming. We find this a lot in our lives as we're recovering from symptoms, that there are people who are really not bringing much to the table. We've been trying to give to them to prove to ourselves that we're good enough. And if they're not appreciative of you, you can move on from those people. I'm not trying to wreck relationships, but I also don't want you to feel stuck with those things because that won't lead to good self-esteem. So trauma can be used as fuel. What you've been through, what your central narrative is, can be used as fuel to drive you towards better living, a better relationship with yourself. So let's remember, you have a relationship with yourself, and so do the other people. You are not as responsible to them as you think. It's their job to know their self-narrative, to take care of themselves, and to be powerful. We can be nice to them, we can be considerate, and I highly recommend all of that. I don't want to change any Goodists out there who are bringing so much good to the world. You don't have to change that to get rid of your symptoms. But if you can feel good about you and know you and honor who you really are, that is key to getting better. And the last thing I'll say about that is that can feel lonely, and I certainly understand that. But one of the things you need to learn to get better from a self-esteem perspective is to enjoy that Your life is no one else's journey. No one else gets to choose your path. When I was a kid, we had these books, Choose Your Own Adventure. This is a choose your own adventure. Nobody gets to decide. You get to decide. And you will be better able to do that and feel more powerful if you've enhanced your self-esteem by understanding your core narrative, honoring that, and following its path in a way where you are fiercely in your own corner. That doesn't mean you're against other people, but it means you won't betray who you are. So I look forward to hearing your comments below. If you haven't already, click subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, and hit like if you like what you're hearing. I would love to have more discussions with you about this. This is such an important topic. Everybody needs good self-esteem, but it's an active thing to pursue. So I look forward to hearing how this goes for you.